Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He is a longtime media personality, an expert when it comes to Baltimore sports, and a co host on the Adam Jones podcast. Let me welcome Jerry Coleman to the show. It's great to have you on.
Matt, it is my pleasure and privilege to be on your second ever guest. Who was first? Can I ask? Because we didn't discuss this beforehand.
Yes, it was a YouTuber content creator named Andrew Fenichel.
Okay. Well, Andrew beat me to the punch, but I'm glad to be here with you.
So let's get right into it. You've obviously been involved in the sports community for a very long time. Can you describe from a young age how you became so passionate about sports and how that passion eventually turned into a career in the industry?
Well, I think I mentioned it when I spoke to the play-by-play camp sportscasting class that you were at recently. That at a young age, I realized, like a lot of us, that we weren't going to be able to play professional sports. That wasn't going to happen. Um, just wasn't good enough. And that's the case for 99.9% of the world. So I had to figure out a way that I wanted to be involved in professional sports. And I didn't want to be an umpire or referee. So I thought broadcasting would be a great avenue. And, I was interested in watching sports on television. I would listen to a radio that kids don't do anymore and put it underneath my pillow, a transistor radio, and listen to a ball game and fall asleep to that. So I was really into radio. And I knew, probably at the age of 12 or 13 that this was something I wanted to pursue. And it began with me recording games off the television and listening back to it. And they were terrible, but it was great practice. And then it became, when I got to high school, doing stuff like the public address announcements, reading the Pledge of Allegiance, being the public address announcer for the basketball games or baseball games, whatever they needed me for. And that carried over to college where, I went to Ithaca College in upstate New York, majored in radio and television, was able to be a part of their radio stations, and even wrote for the newspaper when I was there, and did television.
Yeah, so it seems like you were just pretty active in the sports community throughout your life. So, of
Yeah.
course, I already mentioned in the intro that you're a co-host on the Adam Jones podcast. On Thursday, June 27th, you were able to interview the face of the Orioles franchise, one of the MVP favorites, an all-star, and a player who you described as someone who doesn't believe in sophomore slumps, Gunnar Henderson. What was that experience like?
Well, that was actually the second time we had him on. The first time he was on his parents' couch in Selma, Alabama. This is before he really, became a big star. It was just after his rookie season, before he won Rookie of the Year honors. I think we knew he was going to win it then. He's still pretty much the same person. I hope he stays that way. Very respectful, very professional. I mean, this guy was scheduled to be on at 11:25 a.m. on StreamYard, which we're using right now. We use the same platform.
Yep.
All of a sudden, Adam and I are sitting here like you and I are talking, and up pops Gunnar Henderson right at 11:25 sharp. And yeah, I mean, he's having a terrific MVP caliber year. I do think he is the face of the franchise. I think he's more marketable right now, and in some ways more likable than Adley Rush. But not that Adley's not likable. It's just Gunnar may have an edge because of the underdog role. He was taken in the same draft, but as you know, a round later, and I think has had the better major league career up to this point.
I mean, it's definitely fun to watch Baltimore sports right now when you have those two young players doing great.
That's why you and everyone your age should feel honored and privileged to be able to see something of this nature, because I sat through decades of bad baseball at Camden Yards, and had to endure losing team after losing team after not spending after this guy and not drafting the right guy or trading for the right guy, and watching them fall short a couple of times in the mid 90s. So this is a great time to be a Baltimore sports fan, whether it be the Ravens, who I know we're going to talk about, or of course the Orioles.
Yeah, so sticking with the Orioles for now, in some recent series, we've seen the Orioles lose games to the Astros and Guardians by scores such as 14-11 and 10-8. Of course, when you score 11 and 8 runs in a game, you really have no excuse to be losing those games. All you can do is really point a finger at the pitching. What changes do you think the Orioles will have to make to their pitching rotation to really solidify them as a World Series contender come playoff time?
Well, they're going to have to make a deal at the trade deadline. I don't think there's any question about it. They have lost John Means. They have lost Kyle Bradish. They have lost Tyler Wells. Cole Irvin just doesn't. Albert Suarez, all due respect, they're not frontline starters. They have two in Grayson Rodriguez and, of course, Corbin Burns, and they need to add to that.
Now,
And
is there a specific player that you see them going after?
my number one choice would be the White Sox Scarecrow Shot. I think this kid's a stud. He is a frontline starter, so that would be the choice that I would like to see them make. But
Yeah.
someone who has the ability to go out there, eat up innings, and be a competent starter come October is what they need, because right now they do not have a World Series caliber pitching staff. They're doing great. The Yankees are slumping right now. A lot of question marks with them, but the Orioles have to take care of themselves. And I have a lot of faith that they are going to make a deal when time comes. And with this new ownership group, that'll be the first big test.
But hopefully that will make them contenders because we know that Orioles baseball come playoff time is always going to be exciting.
It is, but they didn't win a game last year.
Yeah.
So, that's what they're looking for, is their first playoff win since 2014. So that's a long time ago. And that's how they're kind of judged in the postseason on how they do, much like the Ravens will be even more. But with the Orioles, just following up on last year's tremendous year, they're on the right path right now.
Yeah, I mean when you look at players like Gunnar Adley who have continued to get better this season, I think that they're probably at a better pace to do well in the playoffs than they were last year. They were more unexperienced, more raw as a team.
I agree. And Gunnar said that during the interview with him.
Yeah.
He definitely said that. But they don't have the pitching guys that they had a year ago. I mean, they have some interchangeable parts. Corbin Burns wasn't on the staff a year ago, but some of the other guys were, and they just need to bring it up a level. And they've lost Felix Bautista, as you're well aware. They don't have him. They have Craig Kimbrell, who surprisingly could be an all-star this year, and he's going to be the next guest on the Adam Jones podcast. Looking forward to having him on. But he has had an up and down year, but it seems like he's the guy that the Orioles are going to go with the rest of the way to close things out.
So we talked about the Orioles for a little bit. Now on to a different Baltimore sports team, the Ravens. Over the offseason, of course, they signed superstar running back Derrick Henry to a 2-year, $16 million contract. With the NFL season coming up, how do you think that signing will impact the success of the Ravens this upcoming season, and does it make them Super Bowl favorites, in your opinion?
I wouldn't say Super Bowl favorite. Contender, definitely. They have to get past Kansas City, and they have proven they haven't been able to do that in the postseason. The Derrick Henry signing was the biggest of the offseason after they saw both of their two of their running backs, and J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, go out to John Harbaugh's brother's team, the Chargers. Derrick Henry, we'll see what he has left in the tank, Matthew. I mean, he's getting near 30 or he's right around there, and usually outside of Adrian Peterson, running backs, when they hit the age of 30, hit a wall, and their career is over. So I do believe he still has something left in the tank. The question is, will they utilize him the right way, where they didn't utilize their running backs virtually at all in the AFC Championship game? So that was the interesting thing, is that they abandoned the run in the AFC Championship and then go out and get one of the premier running backs. And as Coach Harbaugh explained to us during the Adam Jones podcast, and I would encourage everyone to check that out, it's something that they screwed up in terms of running the football, or lack thereof, against the Chiefs. They pretty much panicked against them, and that's something they're looking to rectify and correct for this upcoming season.
Now, I mean, of course, they did need some running help. You mentioned them potentially not being able to make it past the Chiefs in the AFC. Do you think that at this point in time, the AFC is more difficult than the NFC?
Overall, yes. I'm not discounting the Bills, even though they've taken some hits. The Dolphins still have to prove they can win in December in the cold. Um, the Steelers are always there. The Bengals have Joe Burrow coming back. I think the AFC North is the strongest division in football. So I do think the AFC is a much better conference for sure. I think the NFC is more top heavy. I question where Philly's going, what direction. Kansas City is still up there at the top. But, I mean, I just think the better teams are in the AFC altogether. So I have the AFC as a much better conference, especially with the addition of Jim Harbaugh. There's going to be a lot of focus on the Chargers this
And then you also, I don't think you mentioned them, you have the Texans with, I mean, up and
year.
coming CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Will Anderson. They got Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, and Daniil Hunter all in free agency. I definitely
Yeah.
think that they're going to be a contender for many years to come.
Yeah, there's some teams I omitted. First of all, the Ravens will see them on Christmas Day, so that'll be a great game. Unfortunately, it'll be in Houston, but I didn't mention the Lions. I didn't mention the Packers and the NFC because I don't think they're that strong. I just think the AFC teams are better, and we saw what the Ravens did to some of those teams, at least during the regular season.
So when we look at a team that just last season in the playoffs took a loss to the Chiefs, on September 5th, the Ravens faced the Chiefs again in Arrowhead during the NFL season opener. From a mental standpoint, how do you think they'll be able to bounce back and try to defeat the team that previously ended their season?
Well, I mean, that's going to be a big pressure game, and that's the night that the Chiefs are going to flash their Super Bowl rings and trophy right in the Ravens' faces. Hopefully, it motivates them. I mean, that game's so far off, but obviously the Ravens are going to be very motivated going into that game, understanding the importance. It's the NFL opener as well as it should be. It's a rematch of the AFC Championship, but the Chiefs came in here and took the game away from the Ravens at the very beginning, and I would just say it's a revenge game, but it's just one game, so I wouldn't get too caught up in it, win or lose. There's still 16 more to play, and I have said before, the Ravens aren't going to be judged by the regular season, Matthew. It's going to be by the postseason.
Now, you also mentioned that they're going to have extra motivation in that game. Do you think that the players in the locker room, say, are going to show that they are still thinking about that game, or are they kind of going to
Some
keep it to
players.
themselves?
Yeah, some players, because, some of the newer guys like Derrick Henry weren't there for that, so they don't understand how
Yeah.
important it was or how devastating a loss it was. But I'm sure Lamar will get up and speak. I'm sure Coach Harbaugh will speak. Those are the two leaders of the team, and they're still feeling it. And they're going to be asked all about that game the week leading up to the Chiefs, where they'll think it's water under the bridge. Why are we still talking about the AFC Championship? That'll all be brought up after training camp is over, unless someone decides to bring it up during training camp. But it'll definitely be brought up week one before they play Kansas City.
Now, you mentioned that Derrick Henry isn't there. That actually made me think. I think it was maybe the 2019 playoffs when the Titans were facing the Chiefs and the Chiefs had a massive comeback against them. So I guess he probably wants to beat them as well, get his
Yeah,
revenge.
I thought you were going to mention the Derrick Henry stiff arm to Oral Thomas during the playoffs when the
Yeah, that did
Titans
happen too.
That's a bad memory as well.
Yeah.
But you're right, Derrick Henry. Of course, he's going to understand the motivation to want to go out and beat the team that took away the chance for Baltimore to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So when we look at a team like the Ravens that's contending for a Super Bowl title this upcoming season, you look especially at the star players, but I think there's also some smaller names that can make quite a difference. Who do you think is an unexpected breakout candidate for the Ravens this upcoming season?
I think you're going to see a big year from Zay Flowers. And I know he had a pretty good rookie year, but I think he's going to come back and have a very big year. Uh, he had some offseason troubles that washed away. There's going to be a lot of focus on him. I think Rashad Bateman is also poised for a big year, also another first round draft pick. But Zay seems to be a guy that Lamar really connects with, more so than Rashad Bateman. Less than Mark Andrews. I'm expecting
Yeah.
another big year from Mark Andrews. But you asked me for an up and comer, I think it could be Zay Flowers. I think he could be one.
And Mark Andrews' season unfortunately ended early last year. and they didn't get him in the playoffs, so hopefully he can return just as good as he was.
Yeah, he came back. He came back for the playoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he'll be fine. I saw him during the off-season workouts and all that. Which the only reason they hold the OTAs is to see who's in
Yeah.
shape, and doing well physically. And he seemed to be in good condition. I mean, the guy to keep an eye on coming up for the training camp would be Marlon Humphrey.
So, you have mentioned this many times before. When you interview players and coaches, you mentioned that you like to challenge them with difficult questions. You even said that back during Adam Jones' playing career, you asked him many tough questions that he may not have appreciated at the time, but it eventually resulted in you earning his respect.
Right.
With that being said, can you describe your thought process when asking all these difficult questions that truly challenge the person being interviewed?
Well, I think about what the fan thinks about Matthew after a game and why didn't Coach Harbaugh run the ball as much as he should? Why did Brandon Hyde change pitchers when the guy was throwing so well? Why didn't he play this guy in particular? These are reasonable questions that should be asked, especially after a loss. I mean, you know, you have to challenge these guys. You're not there to be a fan of them. You're there to report objectively and try and ask questions that, again, the fan base wants answers to. And a lot of times I'll use that as part of my question. I'll say to the manager, Skipper, the fans seem to be upset over the fact that you brought in Craig Kimbrell instead of so and so, or that you pinch hit for Colton Cowser in the eighth, or Coach Harbaugh. Fans wanted to know. They're calling talk radio, wanting to know why you didn't run the football that much. What would you say to them? And you're never going to hear a coach or manager or whatever say, I don't care what the fans think or anything like that. Usually that's the end of their career when they say that. You don't want to diss the fans. So that's my whole thought process to answer your question coming in is what's going on with the fan base? Not that the fan base is always right, but also what you see from covering the game objectively. I mean, you're in the press box, you're watching the game. Maybe you're listening to it as well on a TV broadcast or radio, and you pick up nuggets throughout the game. I take notes during the game about certain things that happen. And keep in mind, after the game, you're only going to have one or two shots to ask a question. So you got to make it a good one, make it an important one. But you put together notes of things that may be of interest and go ahead and ask a question accordingly afterwards, depending on the situation.
And I
And you
think,
can't be afraid. You cannot
yeah.
be afraid that a manager or a coach is going to yell back at you. They're not going to attack you. I wish someone would have attacked me. I would have retired a long time ago with these guys being millionaires now. But no one's ever tried to punch me or anything like that. I've had verbal disagreements with guys like Adam Jones or Coach Harbaugh or whatever. But there's a lot of mutual respect that goes with that as well.
Yeah. So, of course, throughout your career, you've also had the opportunity to interview many awesome people, cover a lot of important games and everything in between. Can you describe a specific moment of yours that really stands out to you as your favorite or most memorable?
Yeah, in fact, hold on. I can kind of angle it. Picture right here. Uh, I was just upcoming in my broadcast career, and there was this guy playing for the Chicago Bulls named Michael Jordan. And I got to go and interview him before a game as he's lacing up his shoes. He's got his Air Jordans, he's got his jersey laid up. You can see I had the picture signed later, which is kind of unprofessional, but I had someone else do that for me. But that was a great moment back in the 80s because players nowadays don't sit down for 20 minutes. No one's going to go into a locker room right now and interview LeBron James for 20 minutes before a game as he's lacing up his sneakers, whatever. That just doesn't happen. So that was an incredible moment. Michael was very giving with his time. That's why I think he's, one of the greatest of all time, not only on the court, but off the court. I think he did a lot of great things with the media that a lot of people weren't privy to, but he was always accountable, whether he was with the Bulls or I covered him during his entire career as owner and player with the Wizards. So just being around him was one of the greatest experiences of my young career.
When you were interviewing him, was there like a specific question that you may have asked him that you remember?
just about how the way the Bulls were like traveling back then. There's no team that you could describe. It was like Taylor Swift. I guess it would just be like Taylor Swift, except it was the Bulls with Jordan. Everywhere they went, sold out. People waiting for the bus when they got on and off, waiting outside the locker room. I mean, when I, did that with Michael and he came outside the locker room, there was hundreds of people waiting for him. And this is before the game. And then after the game, they're waiting all by the team bus. So it was crazy being around him at that time during the mid, you know, during the highlight days of the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, and I know that I was looking at your Twitter page the other day, and that was actually the cover image of it. So if you
That's
didn't
my
men-
avatar. Yeah.
yeah, if you didn't mention that, I was maybe gonna ask a question about it.
Well, that was a moment. Listen, I've had a chance to be around a lot of great athletes: Ali, Jordan, Gretzky, Tiger Woods. We could go on and on. Joe DiMaggio. Uh, I mean, there's just been so many. I've been very fortunate over the decades to encounter a lot of these all-time legends.
So before we wrap things up, I do have one final question to ask. I like to ask this to most people that I interview, just see how the answers differ and use their answer to help me. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a young aspiring sports broadcaster or podcaster like me?
Well, I got into this a little bit during the play-by-play camp speech and also during the conversation we had. And it's being available and being flexible. Versatility and availability, I think, are the two biggest things at a young age. Make yourself available in all facets. Learn everything there is about the broadcasting business or media in general. I mentioned that I worked for the college newspaper. It's not something that I did well, but it was something I wanted to try out. I did television, I did radio, I edited, I was in front of the camera, I was behind the camera. So I learned to work all aspects of the business because you never know when you're going to be needed and where. Obviously, the goal was to be on air, so you get your reps in and you practice. I started at a young age calling games off the television and all that. And, I would be my biggest critic. The biggest critic is yourself, listening back to tapes and stuff of that nature. But to answer your question, make yourself available and learn a lot about the business, and don't just pigeonhole into one sport or one thing at a young age. Try a bunch of different things.
Yeah, and you mentioned, broadcasting over the TV. That's something that I've tried to get myself to do where you mute it, and just call the game, do it with some other stuff. That's something that I think helps with whether you're good or not at it, just repetition.
And
And
one of the advantages you have is StreamYard and video components like this. Back in the old days, and this was the old days, I would have to take something called a cassette, and you would put that in an envelope with a cover letter and a resume and mail that off and never hear from the person you're sending to ever again. That's the way it worked. Then you would have to call them a million times, even though they told you not to call, or you would have to know someone that knew that person. I mean, that was one of three avenues of trying to get into the business.
so, with that being said, I'm going to wrap things up. I can't thank you enough for coming on and taking time out of your day to be here. To anyone watching this, make sure you follow the Adam Jones podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Again, a big thanks to Jerry Coleman, and we'll see you next time.
Matthew, thanks for having me.